We'll call the meeting for the New Ulm Economic Development Authority for Friday, November 13th, 2015, 7:30. Well, actually, it's 8:30 a.m. to order. First item, we do have a quorum, so the first item on the agenda is approve the minutes of the last meeting.
So moved.
I'll second it.
We got a motion, a second, to approve the minutes of the last meeting. Any discussion on anything? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. Heather, we got the EDA staff regarding administrative activities during the month of October 2015.
Right.
Do we want to go on to Brian's deal, or what do you want?
Yeah, I think maybe before we move on to that, there was talk of having a discussion today on the EDA activity as far as housing versus economic development. Commissioner Berg, did you still want to have that discussion, or
Well, I think so. I think it would.
just have it?
Mhm.
Okay. So Commissioner Berg had brought up some questions on why we aren't more involved in economic development, and we're kind of heavy on the housing side of things. And so Brian Tohal's here to discuss that further and
Sure.
answer any questions you may have.
Okay.
Brian Toll, 15 Woodland Drive.
And Brian is a representative of the Economic Development Corporation.
Correct.
And do you want to talk a little bit maybe about what your role is there?
Well, the Economic Development Corporation, or its predecessors, organization, has been around since the early 1950s. We've partnered with the city to provide economic development for the city of New Ulm. We market the community to the outside world. We work with existing businesses. I meet with all the manufacturers at least once a year, some quite a bit more than that. This month alone we've met with Dennis Skaluzacek of LK, used to be Medallion, Gary Haley of Beacon Promotions, and a couple of others. So on a regular basis, I meet with manufacturers and make sure I have that relationship built up with them. We also historically have been the developer of industrial parks, starting with the industrial park that houses Kraft Foods and Home Industries, or IPEA, back in the 50s, including a number of others. Our current one is the Airport Industrial Park. So I know we have a informal agreement with the city to provide those services. There's no contract, there's no paper. So I'd take any questions.
You have anything, Jeremy?
Well, I guess my question is what can the EDA do to help economic development activities? I mean, I see we're calling EDA, but said
Yeah.
I'm finishing up 6 years here on the board, and
Yeah.
I can't see that we've done anything related to economic development other than housing, which I think is only tangentially related to economic development. I mean, our name is misleading here. We're not an economic. We don't.
It's
We've
my
got a
understanding.
loan fund that I don't recall that we've ever done anything with other than get a report on.
The city, as Charlie knows, is pretty active with the loan fund. That's, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 a year, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
So that's used. I don't think there's a shortage of funding mechanisms. We have a number of revolving loan funds. I think we have 4 revolving loan funds at the city. One is the largest and most used. Brown County has a revolving loan fund. Region 9 has a revolving loan fund. Southern Minnesota Initiative Foundation has revolving loan funds and equity funds. And the state of Minnesota has 3 or 4 revolving loan funds and equity funds. So it's not a lack of financial resources. What we lack is projects, quite frankly. As a small community, we just don't see the medallions come every year. We just don't. We're fortunate to have the ones we do have. And we're very much like any other community our size. In fact, there have been times when people from other communities say, gosh, you know, New Ulm is doing so well. You know, you got, you know, this, and that. And so I don't know if that answers your questions as to why. We have looked at the EDA in the past to do some bonding. It was before your time on the EDA. In fact, it was probably 17, 18 years ago. But that's how I would see, if we got to a point where we're exhausting the revolving loan funds or they don't meet the revolving loan funds criteria, then the EDA has that bonding capacity to help finance a business. So it's always in the back of my mind anyway. It's just that there are so many financing resources out there that we just haven't gotten to it. We haven't had the need.
Well, we've talked about loans, but I mean, are there grants? I mean, I see other EDAs that are doing projects that, you know, we don't do things. We don't buy properties. We don't redevelop.
We do.
Yeah, well, and I wonder why the EDA can't be involved in something like that. I mean, not to displace what the EDC is doing, but to work in conjunction with. I mean, frankly, I don't think you can do too much in a town our size.
No.
I think that there needs to be, I mean, every effort should be made. You know, we see, of course, we're never going to be Mankato,
Right.
but you know, it doesn't mean we can't be competitive that way. And I see their EDA helping with, for instance, environmental cleanups. You know, giving grants. You know, doing projects and taking action to get property either back on the tax rolls or you know, help somebody that's trying to do something along, and it's, you know, not only in the form of loans, but in the form of grants and things like that, or redevelopment. Yeah, you know, and the thing that I think of now is that, you know, we're potentially and probably very likely going to have a big empty box store, and they don't fill up. I mean, I think you look around any community. I think of Shakopee off of 169 and Marshall Road. There's a Kmart that's, how long has that thing sat empty?
Or Hutchinson, that grocery store.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, you know, that'd be a great project for redevelopment, because I don't know. I think we're going to end up with nice prime retail space. It's going to end up being warehouse.
Every community is different as to how they address economic development. New Ulm is somewhat unique in that the city has partnered with an economic development corporation to do its economic development. I know Dave has worked on some grant programs for some environmental cleanup for City Center, the 37-unit apartment building that's slated for the old Kuchtal site, the Danheim site. Dave and his office secured a state grant and provided cleanup dollars for that. I don't know if that work has been done. Pardon? It's still pending. Pending, okay. When we purchased the land for the airport industrial park, we borrowed a significant chunk of money from the city to make that happen. And we were fortunate enough to repay that fairly quickly with the sale of the Beacon building that we had owned prior to them owning it. So we did partner with the city, just not the EDA, just the city, to do the current industrial park. And to be frank with you, knowing what property owners want up in that area, we don't have the balance sheet to do the next one. We just don't. So we're going to have to partner with either the EDA or the city to make that happen. At my board meeting yesterday, we talked about perhaps requesting some of the half-cent sales tax extension money to pay for land and infrastructure. But we invested about $1.2 million in that airport industrial park, and you know, we haven't sold that much land. We're still probably $400,000 in the hole on that one. And the property owners up in that area where the natural extension of the park would be are asking a lot for their property, more than we can afford. So I see that partnership happening. Whether it's EDA or the city, I don't know. That would be an excellent way to partner.
Could be a combination of the three.
Well, I think that's what it needs to be. Like I said, I don't think you can do too much in a city our size. You know, we do have some disadvantages, but we also have some advantages, and there, you know, there ought to be some, there ought to be some coordinated efforts, I think, between the three entities. You know, I think there's a perception that the city isn't exactly development friendly, you know, whether that's right or wrong, but I think that's the perception. I think there's a you know, idea that it's not the way we've always done it, so we're not going to do anything differently. And,
I've heard that perception, but if you look at what's come before the city council, and Charlie, you've seen it, I can't think of a request that was denied.
I've got one for you. And I was gonna bring that up a little later in this discussion, but what is I talked to Brian about it, and I got his interpretation of supposedly what happened with the MnDOT building on that property up there that you're talking about. And to my understanding is that EDA denied selling the property for him because there was no tax revenue to be made on it. Now, what's your opinion?
Yep, they requested to purchase 2 of our lots. We've got 5 industrial lots left. And without the ability to expand the industrial park, we felt that we needed to remain true to the purpose of the industrial park, and that is to create jobs and increase tax base. I will tell you that Dave and Brian went to great lengths to provide MnDOT with appropriate sites. I think 6 sites were proposed by the city. All of them would have done very well for MnDOT. All of them would have worked very well. They rejected all 6 of them.
But the one they wanted, we rejected.
The one they wanted, we said no. Because we need to maintain those lots for job creation and.
But MnDOT would be job creation for New Ulm here. Now we sent them over to Cortland.
I don't think it would create any new jobs.
Yeah, but we would maintain the ones that were here.
And those will be maintained. It's just that they'll have to drive 6 miles.
Right.
I would tell you that right after we said no to MnDOT, I got a proposal through Dave for a company out of Iowa looking to secure 20 to 40 acres. We've got 22 acres left in our industrial park. So I've used that as a proposal, and with some of the incentives that we have that no one else in Minnesota has, I think we've got a pretty decent shot at getting it. It would be 140 jobs. We couldn't have done that if we would have sold it to MnDOT.
True.
We would have had nothing. We couldn't have responded to that prospect. So that's an example of why we did what we did. 140 jobs would be significant.
But those are all ifs.
Yep, that's the way economic development is. You know, that's the game we play.
Sometimes, I personally think you gotta take something when it's available regardless. And then, I mean, you can hang on something forever.
I see our role as having capacity for new development. That's one of the major things we do. That's why we've built 6 or 7 industrial parks in town. That's why we'll have to build the next one. We have to have the capacity. We can't say to somebody that's going to create 140 jobs, here's a farm field. You know, we might have it ready for you in 2 years. You know, they've got a business need today to expand their production facilities. Can't wait 2 years. So we have to have that available capacity. And
But as Jeremy is making a comment, and I guess I've been on here 7 years already too, and everything we do is strictly housing, nothing else. And I don't know if that's really the role we should be in or not, you know. Underneath a lot of city governments, economic development goes more than just what we're doing, as he stated. You cover everything. And maybe the day is gonna come where we need to throw everything underneath the city and be done with it.
well,
Then you got control.
yeah, I would welcome a partnership. I would tell you that we're underfunded, significantly underfunded. Thank goodness we had some cash in the bank from the sale of the Beacon building, but we're pulling 20 to 30,000 out of our savings every year to meet our budget. And I have a minuscule marketing budget. I can't do what I want to do. I just can't.
Well, and that's maybe an area where a good starting point. Said we're a housing authority. Otherwise, that's what we do. I mean, the name was changed. We used to be a housing and redevelopment authority, and then, you know, there's some different statutory things that can be done as an EDA as opposed to an HRA, and that we haven't done them.
Yep.
To my knowledge. And you know, if we're not going to be an EDA, we ought to, frankly, be honest with the people that are footing the bill for this thing.
Yeah, and David, maybe you can speak to that.
Okay, my name's Dave Schnobrick, and I serve as a Community Development Director. In an earlier life, I was also an Assistant Executive Director to the Housing and Redevelopment Authority and then the Economic Development Authority. I started with the city in 1978. There was a HRA at that time. If you go back and look in the minutes, you'll see that it was originally established back in 1968. I think it was done in part to be able to do a project joining the Kiesling House. You know, it was then reestablished in the early 70s because they wanted to get into either public housing or it was the Section 8 program. I think HUD basically told them at that time that the Section 8 existing housing program or voucher program was the route to go, and so that's what resulted in a more active Housing and Redevelopment Authority at that point in time. The establishment of the Economic Development Authority was done with the thought that that group would be able to be more active in Economic Development Authority matters, and specifically would be able to access financing for projects. I think it also was thought that to have the city council be responsible for that maybe was just too much detail for the council to have to deal with, and that maybe we should have a special group that was composed of people that had backgrounds and would be able to facilitate those kind of projects. What happened, though, is that it turned out that one of the primary financing sources, or maybe not the primary financing source, but requirement in state law was that public financing could be used for a public purpose, but public financing could not be used for a private purpose, and if it was, then it was no longer considered public, and so you had to pay what you would be paying in the private market. So all of a sudden the advantage of being a EDA, one of the perceived advantages disappeared. And so at that point, the Economic Development Authority focused more on housing because the city had some resources that they could use for economic development purposes. So that's kind of a quick background as to why this board has the name Economic Development Authority. It didn't quite turn out the way that had originally been hoped.
Are there restrictions as far as partnering, using our funding to work with NUEDC? If what our purpose has been with housing, maybe not what it should be, but
Well, I mean, we have the ability to do a levy, which we're doing. We're at the max levy right now. And we've been using that to make loans to the TIF payment for the Milford Heights subdivision. Could those local levy funds be used to fund the EDC? Do you know, Reg?
I do not know, I guess. Do you know, Dave, or is it something we should check with the city attorney on?
I would think it's probably something you should check with the city attorney on. You know, the NUEDC, you know, currently receives funding from the city, and so I don't know. And the EDA is part of the city through a service contract. So I don't know if you have independent authority to be able to make transfers to different groups or not.
Well, we have other assets available too, other than, I mean, just the levy. I mean, the one
But-
thing that
And
comes to mind is,
Reg came with information on that, so maybe this is the time to bring that up.
Yeah, currently, you know, going through the different funds, we do have the 260 fund, which is our main EDA fund, which is supported by taxes. We do have 450,000 in there. That's currently what we're using a lot for the affordable housing to be able to build the houses and so forth up there. I guess we could check with the city attorney to see what else that we can use that for, because I'm not really sure. You know, like we just talked about, can we help with EDC and so forth. We also have the Garden Terrace funds. As you know, we just paid off the final GT2 note at the end of the month. And so right now our funds are down there quite a bit. Right now we're down around 200,000 in GT1. We should have that somewhere around 320,000. So it's going to take some time to get that built up and then surpass that so that we have those funds to be able to use. The reason we want to have that, you know, approximately 320,000 in GT1 is due to just if something happens there, you know, and we need those funds to draw on for something in particular. They suggested about and this was a few years ago, they suggest about 6,000 per unit to kind of be held in reserves there. That's about just over 300,000. GT2, kind of in the same thing right now. They have about 100K in cash. That should be around 260. So,
How much a month are we kicking out in cash now that we're not making any loan payments?
that should be anywhere from 11 to 14,000 in each one.
Okay.
So it will build up fairly quickly. I
Mhm.
mean, I think by the end of next year, we should have those balances built up.
But instead of waiting a year, considering we have these two buildings that are free and clear now with no debt against them, I mean, if, God forbid, something we need a new roof, a new whatever, and it's gonna be $500,000, you also have that asset there. I mean, isn't there a way we could start using some of this cash now to help Brian's group to do something instead of waiting, you know, another year and a half from now, we finally start talking about what we wanna do with it, and then it takes another year and a half to decide, and pretty soon it's 6 years later and no one's done anything. That, to me, in my growing up in this community, seems about like the New Ulm way, and I do not like it.
Well, that's your guys'
Yeah.
decision.
And
It's not mine.
I understand that.
So-
That wasn't pointed directly at you,
Right.
Reg. I'm just saying. I've been, just like Jeremy's getting frustrated being on this board 5.5 years. I've been on it 3 years, and I would agree with him. Other than getting to, know some of these people that I never knew worked for the city, I haven't gotten anything out of it, and I don't think my time has been used appropriately. So I would be all for finding some way to get moving and helping. And if it's partnering with Brian so that he can do more marketing and it's money coming out of our budget, out of the GT2, GT1, I don't care. I want to do something to get New Ulm growing again, not just running a housing project that is floundering because we can't build houses as cheaply as we want to.
Is that really, the direction as far as leveraging the cash flow? Because now that they're paid for, we're gonna have excess of, it's great to be in that position, but utilizing that cash flow for other projects versus just housing, it's gonna put us in a real unique position that probably a lot of communities maybe don't have that access. And as long as there's no restrictions, if
Yeah,
there's
and that's one
projects
of the
that we
reasons
can
we
work
wanted to
on.
get those paid and, so that we'd
No, I
have that
think,
cash flow. I think
$25,000
where
a
Reg
month.
is coming from is he's trying to be prudent and fiscally responsible and not bankrupt the buildings, but, you know, it's certainly up to the board to make those choices, so.
Well,
You know,
know,
if this
another
is something
option
you want us to bring up for a future action, we can, we're directed by you, so.
I'd like to know, first of all, you know, the source of funding, if there are restrictions, you know, what we can use those funds for. I mean, before we get
So we'll
all
check
the
with the city
projects, I
attorney.
mean, can we help another entity utilizing those funds
The Garden Terrace funds
specifically?
I
Yeah, because that's
I
where the
think
cash
that
flow is going to come into
would
play.
be easier than, I think that we have probably a little more freedom than we would with the local levy tax money. There's probably more regulation
True.
on that
Absolutely.
funding source, but the Garden Terrace we own,
Well, and it's market rate housing. So I mean, and if
There's no
back
federal money,
it's-
right,
Exactly, and
right.
that, you know, the federal stuff should probably be separate
it has
because
to
that
be.
is more housing
It has to
development,
be.
those types of
Right.
things. And we have the housing project already in existence, which is a good thing. I think long term, hopefully, it can grow. But specifically, if we're looking at economic development, it's a, you know, market rate housing, it's separate. If it can generate cash flow to help other areas and help the city grow, that's a great idea.
Mhm. So, that's something that Reg and I can, look into and report back at the next meeting, as far as what our options are there and then take further direction on what the board's wishes are.
Yeah, and then maybe we got more members here present to get
Mhm.
better discussion.
Yeah, and it sounds like if we're not going to go that direction and get, more economic development, then maybe we need to look at, do we want to be an EDA or do we go back to being an HRA?
Mhm.
Is kind of what I'm hearing. So,
Did you have something to Jerry?
Well, no, I was just gonna,
Oh.
I mean, it's nothing that certainly needs to be decided now, but just by way of an example is that, you know, if there's a, I don't know what it would be, but if there was a project or something where we needed some money or where it was a real opportunity for the community, you know, it's come up from time to time that, and should we even own the market rate housing? Should we own Garden Terrace? And we've had offers over the years for, possible purchase of it, and frankly, I've had people in the community say, you know, with different ideas, they said, what about Garden Terrace? You know, there's a lot of equity there. Yeah, and, you know, that's a possibility too for things, but.
But there's a better possibility now that they're paid
Oh,
off.
right,
Now we
yeah,
got a revenue
if we've got
source
an
that we can use
ongoing
for
cash
other
flow,
things.
that's, yeah.
So,
yeah, unless someone's going to offer us a really great
yeah,
price to buy them.
it'd be foolish.
And I think that might be the thing that we recall from before is when we took a look at the offer from before, it was not really all that good.
No.
Well, and you have to have the use of the funds too. I mean,
Right.
if we had an offer to sell them, but yet we could reinvest in, you know, other property that would help the city grow, I mean, I could see that as a nice option, but if we have cash flow to still utilize the equity and cash flow in those to help, and in the industrial park per se, or something like that, then, you know, those options should be looked at.
Mhm. I think if you just look into it and then
Mhm.
get back to us at another meeting once and tell us our
We will-
options.
We will do that. So,
All right.
I guess I've got one more question for Brian. Do you, I mean, EDC, is that, I mean, you're mainly focused on industrial, not so much commercial.
If a project or a opportunity shows up, I don't ignore it.
Mm-hmm,
There is a person hired by the chamber, Tara Knopf,
mm-hmm.
that does the retail development.
Okay.
Trying to go to the mic.
So Kara Knopf with the chamber is the retail development director. And she's the one that's working to fill the Target building. and contacting companies like Shopco and others. So does that answer your question?
Well, right, yeah. But I mean, there again, we're kind of we've got, not that there isn't communication, there isn't working together, but it seems like we could have a more synchronized effort on
Partnership.
behalf, EDC, EDA, Chamber,
I would tell
City
you
Council.
that Dave and I talk multiple times every week. And same with Brian Gromnitz. So there is good coordination between the EDC and the city. I feel that the city is very supportive of economic development in the EDC. You guys don't see it as much, and you probably can't pull it out of the short report that I send you every month. But I'm hoping I answered your question.
Yep, that's fine.
Well, and Brian used to attend our meetings mostly every month to give the report and answer questions in person, and I think there was a schedule conflict at one time.
The two things. There was a conflict when my kids were still at home and needed rides to school.
Yeah.
You guys
Same
have kids.
conflict
Three of us
having.
can appreciate that.
So
That's why
we're
we're here.
actually-
That's
My
why
wife
we're here on
often-
8:30 on
8:30.
Friday.
My wife often goes to work early, so it's just I was the bus for the kids. They're gone. I haven't been attending because of exactly what Jeremy's talking about, that you guys do housing. I don't have much to do with housing, so.
Mhm.
But I send you the report because Brian Gromnitz wants me to, and requested that I do so.
When you're out talking with prospective people coming to town, does housing ever come into play? Has anyone ever said, we'd love to come to Newell with our 100 jobs, but we don't know where our employees would live? Does that ever factor in at all, or is that,
No.
okay?
Not that I recall.
Okay.
You know, they may think of it and they may evaluate it, but when they talk to me, they're talking about what incentives do you have to offer? You know, what's your wage data? How much do people that are machinists or welders or engineers, what do they get paid in New Ulm, and what's available for property or building? And
Brian, I just have one final question. When you talked about wanting a marketing budget, do you have a dollar amount in mind? So we have an
no, I
idea
don't.
what your
You know,
ask would
our
be?
current budget is about $4,000 to $5,000, so you can't really do much with that. But the fact that we're pulling money out of savings every year, you have to limit what you do. It's limiting. You know, with marketing, it's like advertising. There's no guarantee that it's going to produce results. You know, you guys all advertise. You don't know if it works or not, but you do it.
How much did you say you're taking out of savings
Between 20 and 30,000
a
annually.
year?
And Dave attends our meetings every month.
Yeah, let me just comment on that. I do attend their meetings, which are monthly. Matter of fact, they had one yesterday. I've been doing that for, I don't know, 10 to 15 years. Prior to that, Dick Salvati regularly attended the meetings, and matter of fact, I used to accompany him on sometimes. So that's, I think, how I ended up with that role. So there always has been a very close, coordination between the corporation and the city. The city has told the corporation, if you're short money for anything, come talk to us. We're a resource. We're working together. We're looking to do things that are in the best interest of the city of New Ulm. So they're aware of that fact, and we periodically do have those kind of conversations about different things. So that's really been a long-standing understanding between the two groups. I think one of the reasons that you have obviously the city is a public group, corporation is a private group. A private group has the ability to do a few more things in private that a public organization can't. So we always kind of thought that it was a good arrangement as long as we were talking to each other. So, and I think it's worked out well.
There are, quite frequently, prospects don't want to be identified. They don't want to attend a public meeting. They want to be anonymous in case what they're thinking about doesn't come to fruition. Or they don't, if a business is looking at relocating, they don't want to scare the people in the town they're leaving. So there's a lot of things that I do that I don't even report to my board. They're private meetings. They're anonymous. And I think that's valuable.
Yeah, that's understandable.
So, yeah, I think if we can find ways that we can partner with you and that's what the board's wishes are, I think that would be great, if we can help you out in any way.
One option, other than the industrial park, might be if the EDA identifies what it might do, so that I know when I'm talking with prospects what the specific capabilities or desires of the EDA would be. What would you do to help a business move here? That would be valuable. And if it's a grant, that'd be great. That would set New Ulm apart from other communities, like this Confluence one that Dave sent to me. I know that the towns in Iowa and South Dakota offer grants. We don't.
Would you be able to send me some information on what they're doing?
What Iowa's doing?
What those grants, like the dollar amount and where the money's coming from, or?
In Iowa, the money comes from lottery.
Oh,
So it's in Iowa, the state is the coordinator of in every deal. So the cities partner dramatically more than what we do in Minnesota. The state has lots of resources, but if they get leads, I very seldom see them. And if I get a lead, I'm not necessarily going to use the state because the state's money is cumbersome, I guess the way to put it. It's much quicker, much easier to use the local revolving loan fund, to use tax increment financing or tax abatement than to go up to the state. It takes 6 months to get a state loan. And 6 months, there are very few businesses that want to wait that long and then have to deal with all the paperwork. And Dave is the one that gets shouldered with the paperwork for the city.
Okay, any more questions, Mark?
Well, just a comment, I guess, is I can imagine that for both Dave and Brian, that you're probably collegial with your counterparts in other communities, but on the other hand, hey, we're competitors with other communities, so you're maybe not hearing what their best deals are. But, one of the things, I've forwarded some information just that I've seen recently on what other communities are doing, and I think that, whether it's board members or staff or you folks, you can mine media for what other communities are doing for things like economic development. I mean, I think a simple Google search for something like that, or just watching newspapers from other towns online, usually those are pretty big stories in towns our sizes. Community X is doing this for business Y and whatever else, and so that can come up. Some ideas can come up that way, and it frankly, Brian, you said you wanted to know what we can do. Well, maybe that's something where the board, this board needs to have maybe a workshop or a strategic planning type of meeting where we list some priorities, and you folks should be there too. Yeah, and the chamber, and where what can we do to coordinate efforts? How can the EDA support these efforts that the other development folks in town are doing?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
That's all I have otherwise.
Good job. All right, then we'll go on to Heather
all right.
for your administrative report.
Thank you for coming. Moving on then switching back to housing. We'll give you the overview of the different funds, starting with the Section 8 fund on page 1 and 2 of your report. Note we had 170 households on the Section 8 program for the month of October. Housing assistance payments exceeded disbursements from HUD by just over $250 for the month. And the administrative fee disbursements exceeded expenses by $685 for the month. Note the unaudited balances on pages 3 and 4 of your report. And note the numbers did drop down to 103 for the month of November, and we have a waiting list of 91. Staff does continue to issue vouchers. I just found out yesterday one of our families that had ported out to Madison, Wisconsin. The housing authority there is going to absorb them as of December 1st. And that one household, the cost of that one household pays for about 3 vouchers in our area. So it was a high cost household, and based on our average HAP costs here, we could be assisting another 3 families with that voucher. So getting that back is good news, and we do continue to issue vouchers. We just sent out another 5 letters yesterday. So trying to build our numbers up. Unfortunately, they're dropping faster than we can add, but we're working on that. Any questions on the Section 8 program? Right, moving on then to the public housing program. Note the monthly and year-to-date program activity there. As of October 31st, revenues have exceeded expenditures by about $8,700 so far this fiscal year. And note the cash asset summary. Note on page 8, Broadway House has 1 vacancy with 58 on the waiting list, and we do have someone moving in December 1st. And on page 9 of the report, note the family units have 1 vacancy with 60 on the waiting list, and we have a family lined up to move in there also December 1st. I do have another family that we're taking to court for eviction later this month, so we should have another opening there unless those issues are resolved. Any questions there before we move on? All right. Moving on then to page 10 of the report, note in the EDA fund, the revenue and expenditure status, cash assets of just over $450,000. Note that staff submitted an application for Minnesota Housing Finance Agency impact funds, hoping to use that money up in the Milford Heights subdivision. We received a letter that our application will not receive funding this year. If those funds are available again, we'll bring that back to you. A copy of that letter is attached at the end of the report for your review. Moving on to the Property Rehabilitation Loan Program on page 11 of the report, available funds of just under $338,000. There's been no new activity in that fund for several months now. Probably don't anticipate anything until spring. Not a lot happens over the winter historically. And moving on to the rental property funds on page 12, cash assets of $65,755. And finishing up with the Garden Terrace report. Garden Terrace has 87 units leased with 59 on the waiting list. Currently 1 vacancy there. They had 2 turnovers last month, and they have 1 move-out notice pending for December. And note the decrease in the cash balances this month, both due to the retirement of the Garden Terrace 2 note, and we also made a payment in lieu of tax payment on both buildings this month. So cash balances took a dip. Any questions?
Anybody have any questions for? If not, entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
We got a motion and a second to accept the economic development report for October 2015. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. Item 4A, receive a Section 8 Management Assessment Program score for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2015. Heather?
All right, this is just for your information, there's no action required. Every other year, we have to submit a report on the activity in the Section 8 housing program. So that was brought to the board a few months ago for approval. That was submitted to HUD, and through that assessment process, we received a score of 100% and continue with our high performer rating for that program. So that's good news.
Okay, thank you. Now, item 5A, consider motion authorizing payment of public housing program claims. Anything that jumps out on you? Otherwise, everything looks routine,
It's
pretty well.
routine.
I'll make a motion authorizing payment of the claims for November 13th, 2015.
I'll second it.
We got a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. Item 6A, consider authorizing staff to secure bids and construction for a speculative house.
All right, so we have been discussing this house for several months now. Previously, we had solicited bids on the house. They were ultimately rejected, and we took some feedback from Century 21 Realty on the house design, made some recommended changes, and now we're bringing the revised house design back for approval. And if approved, we will move forward and solicit new bids.
All right. I
So-
looked at it and I didn't see any.
Yeah, the change was the laundry room was moved to the lower level to give us more room upstairs to make the second bedroom a little bit bigger. And so that was the change that we made.
Did you ever look into whether we could eventually start using these lots for twin homes?
Brian was going to do that, and he wasn't able to be here today because the meeting was rescheduled, so I don't know what he found out there, but he was going to check into that.
What was was there concern over some funding, or is it just the covenants and zoning?
Zoning. He was gonna look if we could build a twin home on these lots, or if
Mhm.
we had to do single family. Because when that was one thing that Jeff Dietrich said when he came in, not only about this, but he suggested that a twin home or a multiplex kind of thing would be a lot more in demand in the community. They get more people coming in asking for those types of housings than this. So
Yeah, so that's something we can look at on a future build. We can ask Brian about that next month if he's at the meeting.
Otherwise, we're just looking for a motion to secure bids, right?
Correct.
I'll
Right,
make the
to approve
motion.
the design and.
Yeah, I'll make a motion authorizing staff to secure bids for construction of a speculative house on Block 3, Lot 3 in the Milford Heights First Edition.
I'll second it.
We got a motion and a second. Any more discussion? Not? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. Item 7A, receive and propose changes to the current bylaws, or review, I should say, and propose changes to the current bylaws.
Yeah, and the main reason we're bringing this up is we've had a lot of discussions lately about our meeting time and whether it's working for commissioners to meet. We've had difficulty reaching a quorum, having to reschedule. So if we want to look at changing our meeting time, we would have to make the revision in our bylaws, because the bylaws in Article 3, meetings, Section 3, regular meetings, we do state that we meet the second Tuesday of the month at 7:30 a.m. In talking with some other housing authorities that have had to change their meeting time, it sounds like they just did it as a revision rather than adopting new bylaws. They would just make that change to that section and pass it as a revision, which we certainly can do. But this is a time to review the bylaws, and if there's other changes, now would be the time to make those, and I can bring back a draft for approval at an upcoming meeting. So I don't know if everyone's had time to review the bylaws and if there were other changes, or if we specifically want to look at our meeting time.
I took a look at them, and the only thing I thought was what you might consider, if, I don't know why it wouldn't be possible, but if statute allows for the EDA that rather than stating a specific time and date for meetings, that at the annual meeting, that a time and date for the following year is considered by the board because of changed circumstances. I mean, I know when I came on, it wasn't any issue to be here but then my kids got to be school age and my wife goes to work at 6:30 in the morning, so, then it became more difficult to be here. And I know, Pete and Jason are in the virtually the same boat, same type of jobs and everything, that it wasn't possible for us, but, things do change. Kids get older, maybe they don't need to be dropped off, that sort of thing, or can be left off earlier. But to me, rather than chiseling this thing in stone and burying it under an old tree, maybe a more flexible approach to scheduling could be incorporated.
Okay. I can check into that and see if
I
that's.
would think we should be able to, because I know
possible.
different meetings that I attend, we'll set it up at the beginning of the year. Here's your printout, that's when the meetings are gonna be, and set. And, if you guys got more
Collectively, as
input.
we sit, whoever's on the board,
Yeah.
you can do
They
that
can decide
annually.
each year, so the next 3 years from now, when we're all turned over, maybe then they can pick
A different
some
time.
other time works
Right.
for them. That way it's not, I like that idea if possible.
Okay. So yeah, I'll check into, if that's possible and, bring that back. So as far as our group and when it works for us to meet, did anyone have a suggestion?
I guess it's up to the younger ones. Me, it don't make too much difference.
The only thing I would say is, 8 o'clock or later, just
Yeah.
because that way we can drop kids off at school.
And come here.
In summer it's not a big deal because the kids are sleeping in, but the 9 months of school, it's tougher to help my wife with the kids at home and then get them to school when I gotta be here at 7:30.
So it's not the second Tuesday that's really the issue,
No,
it's the
it's the
time.
All the time, for me. 8 o'clock, I mean, not to set a time in stone right now, but 8 o'clock would work. The kids are at school.
Mhm.
Actually, that would work really well because bank doors don't open till 8:30, and a lot of times if we're
Shorter meetings, you're done.
And that's why
and-
we also
Still
need
done.
to take into account what Les and Mike, if
Absolutely.
Les has a standing meeting at 8:30, he can't
Mhm.
schedule
Yeah.
himself at 8 o'clock here, so maybe we do have to move it to the Monday or Thursday or
Yeah.
whatever.
Well, maybe I could send out one of those doodle
Right.
calendars and have everyone check kind of
Sure.
what would
Sure.
work for them and see what
If there's a
I
time
get
that,
the better,
Mhm.
responses for and bring that back, so.
Sounds great.
There's no action at this time on that item.
No, this was just to get,
Motion.
board feedback, and then I'll work on a draft to bring back, and then we would approve it.
Okay, so we don't need nothing, no action. All right. So then we'll go on to item number 8, from Economic Development Coordinators regarding the activities during the month of October 2015. You all looked at those, I'm sure, so entertain a motion to accept them.
So moved.
Second.
We got a motion and a second to accept the Economic Development Coordinators report. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. With no more business, meeting adjourned.